back live with Andrew Bolt with the Bolt Report.
How do we get the refugee program so wrong, and why is it so difficult for people to admit it? Well, one immigration minister did at least try to fix it, and 10 years ago it was Kevin Andrews, who said the crime rates for Sudanese refugees here and Somalian were too high. There was a problem, he said, and until we fixed it, he would stop taking in more refugees from those countries. For that, journalists savaged him, called him a racist. The Age newspaper was worse. And then, Victoria's Chief Commissioner of Police, Christine Nixon, falsely claimed her data showed the young Sudanese that police had to deal with did not, she said, in a sense represent more than the proportion of them in the population. Completely false, completely false. Well, joining me earlier today was Kevin Rudd, I wish, or do I? Kevin Andrews, still a Liberal MP. Kevin Andrews, thank you so much for your time. Yesterday's attack in Brighton is the fourth terrorist attack in a row by Muslim refugees. Can you explain to me, why are we still taking in Muslim refugees from countries like Syria, like Iraq, countries which have jihadist problems?
We have to seriously look at this. As you know, under Peter Dutton as the Immigration Minister, there have been some changes and an attempt to ensure that we don't bring people into Australia who don't share our values. But my belief is that we need to have a much stronger values commitment from people who come overseas to Australia to ensure that they will actually fit into our culture and our way of life.
How would that work?
Well, we should be asking people questions about their values. I mean, not all cultures subscribe to the same values. We have a set of values based on peace and goodwill, on justice and on toleration in the West. Not every other culture shares those values, and if people are not going to subscribe to those values, well then there are many other refugees in the world who would like to make their home in Australia.
Except I can immediately see two problems with that, of course. One is people will lie to get in. You know, do you support jihad? No, tick, that's easy. The other is you can't screen the children. Too often we're letting in people, the parents are fine, but their children turn to jihad. That's the issue, isn't it?
That is an issue. I mean, many of these people who've committed crimes, terrorist offences in Australia and overseas are second generation, who have been radicalised in their new country. What we have to look at much more stringently is a lack of tolerance for people who both preach and practice Islamist ideology. I mean, this is the cause of what's going on. It's the cause of this terrorism, and we should have a zero tolerance policy towards both the practice and those who preach this hate and fill the minds of young people, so much so that they'll go out and blow up themselves and countless others.
But I just wonder whether it isn't easier and safer if we considered a Donald Trump type policy to stop or drastically cut immigration from certain Muslim countries where jihadism is strong and government records are bad, so we can't actually do some of the checking that we want. Doesn't that actually make more sense, rather than all this screening, which won't even work for the children anyway? Just cut the immigration and the refugee programs from those countries.
Well, I think it's a little bit more complex than that, Andrew. If you take, say, a country like Egypt, where there are many Copts who are persecuted, they're some of the people who we would like to have here in Australia. There may be other people in Egypt that you don't want to have. So I don't think we can apply it on a country-by-country basis.
All right, let me redefine it. Let me refine it. Muslim immigration from countries where jihad is strong. Why aren't we simply doing what seems to me perfect sense to not add to the burden that we've got already?
What makes sense, Andrew, is to ensure that as best we can, Australia is not a home, a place of emigration for people who subscribe to, you know, the evil of an Islamist ideology, which is frankly contrary to everything that we stand in the West, who don't come here to make the most of their lives. And there's a small group of people, but nonetheless come here and then want to undermine and in fact blow up our society. Now, we've got to stop that. At the same time, there are many people of Muslim religion and Muslim faith who are peaceful, ordinary people who want to make the most of their lives. I know it's difficult, but we have to draw a clear line between those two groups.
But we can't. That's the whole point. You can't draw the clear line because when they come in, you can't screen for their children who turn to jihad. There is no clear line. We talk about radicalisation here. Some will be radicalised here, yes. And the whole thing is, you know, I agree with you. Most are quite law-abiding, but there's no consolation to the family of the Chinese Australian who was murdered yesterday to say, don't worry, most Muslims actually won't do this. I mean, it's too late.
Look, I agree with the principle, Andrew, that we've got to ensure that these sort of people, if possible, don't come to Australia. They're not in a situation where they're radicalised here. But I think this has got to be a multi-prong attack on the problem. I mean, we've got to attack the hate preachers, both those overseas who can communicate by modern communications and those who are here in Australia. Why should we allow people in Australia to effectively be preaching hate in a way that sends young radicalised people out into society to commit awful crimes? We have to stop them as well.
Look, I agree with you. Stop, cut the hate preachers, do all those sorts of things. I'm talking about one prong. One is stop the preacher, but two is not have much of an audience for him here. This is the whole problem. We're importing a huge audience of people who may well listen to this hate preacher. And I want to ask you this then. Have we got the refugee program wrong? Wouldn't it actually be safer? And wouldn't we actually be able to help more people if we help refugees in the countries they're in rather than bring a lucky few here?
Well, we are doing that. If you look at, say, our contribution in the Middle East, when we announced that we would take some more people from Syria, for example, or escaped from that Syrian-Iraqi conflict, then we've also putting considerable amount of money into helping people at home. You're right. Most people who are refugees in the world will either return to their country of origin or they will stay in the country in which they are refugees at the present time. You know, we take, tens of thousands, a lot on a comparative basis by world standards, but the reality is most refugees will not find a new home in a country like Australia. So we have to be helping those in terms of stopping wars, of doing what we can, for example, to defeat ISIL, but also helping them where they are at the present time, because that's where the overwhelming majority are going to actually stay.
Well, I still think it's better to help them there, not also bring in the lucky few here and take the risk, because I don't think the risk is paying off. But look, I appreciate you coming on, Kevin. Thank you very much. And, congratulations on withstanding that character assassination when you tried to do something about this a decade ago. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.